short introduction. So, Assalamu alaikum everyone. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. Rabbi shrah li sadri wayassir li amri wahlul 'uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli. Second, the issue of envy. I mean, we may hear the term all the time, and we might not give much thought to it, but in reality, like, envy is not something that we take lightly, since it's an issue that's not just prevalent within the Bengali, the Desi, but overall in the Muslim community. One of the biggest complaints and biggest issues that we see amongst each other is envy or jealousy that is perpetuated among all age groups, all social classes, and all cultures as well. And so when we see envy permeate, it really hinders our potential as a community. We see that we're not investing in each other's success so that the Muslim Ummah or even the Bengali community can rise. No, but we're investing in our own failure and downfall instead when we're doing this. When we don't want each other to rise, that impacts us, and that this might be the reason why that the Muslim Ummah is not at one of the heights that it's been in history right now. That's just very brutal truth that I have to say. And I mean, our Prophet ﷺ, he also mentions that there has come to you a disease of the nations before you, envy and hatred. And these are the shavers. And I do not say that it shaves hair, but it shaves faith. And our Prophet ﷺ, he also mentions that beware of envy, for verily it destroys good deeds the way that fire destroys wood, essentially. And so our Prophet ﷺ gives a very, very big warning against it, is that it not only hinders our own success, but it destroys our own spirituality and our own iman on the inside as well. So it destroys us personally, it destroys our communities. And envy, as I mentioned, it's not a harmless disease, because, and what I mean by disease, I don't mean like physical disease, like heart disease or cancer. I mean a spiritual disease, or a disease of the heart. You know, as you may have heard, the heart itself, it's not just a physical organ, it's a spiritual organ as well, and it can be impacted by diseases too. And envy is one of those diseases, but it's probably the most potent one out of all of them. Because it can cause other spiritual diseases as well, such as constant anger towards the people around you, constant sadness, resentment, and ultimately the loss of connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And all the scholars will agree that either this is the most dangerous spiritual disease or one of the most dangerous. And I might use the term jealousy, envy, or hasad in Arabic interchangeably, but you know, the word jealousy in English, it doesn't do justice to the translation, because there are good types of jealousy too, and I do want to go over them very briefly, just so that we don't confuse all types of jealousy with one another. There is a positive type of jealousy, or a ghibba, which can even be praiseworthy, because our Prophet ﷺ, he mentions that true envy, hasad, it's only justified in two cases. When you see someone whom Allah has given wealth and they use it for good, or someone who has been given knowledge such as Quran and wisdom and they use it and teach it. In those cases, desiring to have similar blessings for yourself is allowed. This means that when we have no resentment, and I mean, even I feel sometimes like, when I see someone who is half the Quran, it makes me think that, okay, I'm very happy, mashallah, al-mabarak, that they've achieved that. But it also means that I need to do a lot of work to catch up and memorize Quran myself. So if you see good in someone and it motivates you to do something good as well, that is totally fine. As long as you have no resentment towards that person, and as long as you don't want them to lose the blessing that they have, that type of jealousy is fine. And Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, he also says that jealousy is the hatred of Allah's blessing upon one another. So if you don't hate a blessing and aspire towards it, then it itself is praiseworthy. If we want to gain more wealth to give charity, that's also totally fine. But again, we have to have no resentment towards people. We still want that good for them, but we also want to achieve good ourselves without competing, essentially. And the second type of positive jealousy is al-ghira, which is the protective jealousy one can have over their family, religion, the Prophet, the Ummah.
And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala even, and this is more of like, comes from a protective responsibility as opposed to jealousy. Some might see this, and Ibn Qayyim rahimahullah, he says that a servant's ghira over their beloved is of two types: praiseworthy ghira, which Allah loves, and blameworthy ghira, which Allah dislikes. And so these two are separate topics that we can talk about another time, but I just wanted to explain them so that we don't confuse them with hasad, which is the bad type of jealousy that I'm going to expand upon today. But there is good jealousy. Not all jealousy is bad. But let me go into what that bad type of jealousy is. First and foremost, hasad is one of the original actions of the shaitan. Where, in shaitan he said that, do you not see this whom you have honored above me? If you delay me until the day of resurrection, I will destroy his descendants except for a few. And so shaitan was jealous of Adam alayhi salam for being raised above him and above all of the angels. And out of his jealousy for him, he wants to destroy all of us. But essentially when we have jealousy, we want people to have less blessings and achieve less status. We are inhibiting a characteristic of the shaitan as well, whether it's arrogance or whether it's having hasad for one another. And our Prophet ﷺ, he also mentions that any possessor of any blessing will be envied. And so even for the simplest thing, even if you have like maybe a nice ring or a nice watch, I mean, mashallah, Kasham uncle has a very nice watch, so I will just say mashallah to him. And so even for little blessings such as that, people can have envy towards you. And the concept of hasad being a cause of harm, it's not something new that in Islam even. It's something that's existed in every culture throughout history. We see people having many traditions to avoid evil eye. Like we see in a lot of in South Asia, for example, you put like a black, like like when a new baby is born. I mean, that's not an Islamic tradition at all, but it's one that's, again, way older, that people think that will protect them from evil eye. A lot of the times people might also dress, I think in the ancient Chinese culture, they used to dress up their young boys as young girls to prevent jealousy from coming to them. So, again, these are un-Islamic, but it still goes to show that this has been a serious issue for thousands of years, pretty much. And our Prophet ﷺ, he confirms the existence of this, where he says that the evil eye, or ayn, is true. As Muslims, you don't believe in bad luck or superstition, obviously, but then ayn is not from superstition. It is something that is quite real and can cause you harm or even death. And it's dangerous because it's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He is al-mun'im, He's the one who gives us blessings. So when we say that, oh, this person doesn't deserve this, or this person doesn't deserve that, we are directly challenging Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when we are saying this. That, that person isn't deserving of it, and so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't know best. And I mean, may Allah protect us from even thinking that. And even some scholars will even say that some might try to remove this blessing or potential to gain even more blessings because of this. And I mean, there is a story actually from one of the scholars of the past where he went to visit one Bedouin who was okay looking, I'll say that. But then he saw that his wife, who was serving them, food and drinks and whatnot, was a very beautiful woman. And so the scholar asked him, how did you two end up marrying each other? And then she said that perhaps I am a blessing from Allah that has been given to this man. So we ultimately shouldn't be questioning what sort of blessings that are given to people, because we are directly questioning and challenging Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But despite Islam very clearly forbidding this, whether it's from our Prophet ﷺ, whether it's from the Quran, we all know what happens in our community. We see people talking badly about some people for some of the things they're doing, or some of the things that they've achieved, and they try to bring them down. I don't need to really emphasize on this because we see this all the time, unfortunately. And we see the lengths that people will take. So what are some of the causes of this? There are a couple of causes that the scholars point out. They'll say that perhaps enmity between one another. Perhaps there's someone you genuinely don't like for whatever reason, and you don't want to see them succeed. I mean, still, that's not a justification for wanting a blessing to be taken away from someone, or having them be restrained from the good that Allah has provided. It could be that we might be jealous of each other because we're trying to vie for affection, love, or a certain award in some case. Like when we're competing, for example, for a promotion or for a job or for whatever, we might get jealous if we see someone else achieving it over us or getting some sort of advantage. Or it could be that pride or status that can come in the way. And we see this in the stories of the Quran. Like for example, Fir'aun, in a sense, was jealous of Musa alayhi salam when he was given prophethood and privilege from Allah over him, because Fir'aun thought he himself was God and that he had everything. We also see that many of the senior members of the Quraysh, like Umayyah ibn Khalaf, Abu Jahl, and Walid ibn Mughira, they were also jealous of the Prophet ﷺ that he was the one who received the Quran. Even in the Quran it said that وَقَالُوا لَوْ لَنَزَّلَ هَذَا الْقُرْآنَ عَلَى رَجُلٍ مِنَ الْقَرْيَتَيْنِ عَظِيمٍ. And they explained, if only this Quran was revealed to a great man of the two cities. So they challenged Allah's decisions in the Quran being given to the Prophet ﷺ over them, because they saw themselves as higher. And even this desire is explained by this verse, فَلْيُرِيدُ كُلُّ امْرِئٍ مِّنْهُمْ أَن يُؤْتَى صُحُفًا مُنَشَّرَةً. In fact, each of them wishes to be given a personal letter from Allah for it to be read essentially. So they wish that they felt that they deserved it more than the Prophet ﷺ, which again comes from that pride that they have. We can all see that when any of us may have low self-esteem or self-worth compared to those who are gaining more, we feel that we get a bit of an inferiority complex. That could be a cause of jealousy too. And the last thing is like a love of leadership. So when someone has a position of power, they're afraid of people around them gaining power in relation to them essentially. They don't want people to overstep them, and so they become jealous when they see people gaining. Or if we desire a position of power, we get jealous of those who either get these positions or those who are coming closer to getting these positions as well. And so these are just a couple of the causes of jealousy. And again, these can lead to a lot more societal effects. One of them can be suspicion, where when in the Quran Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to avoid much suspicion. Indeed, suspicions are sins, and do not spy essentially. And the Prophet ﷺ, he also said to be aware of suspicion, for it is the falseness of speech. He tells us not to eavesdrop, spy on one another, to not envy one another and forsake one another, and not to hate one another either. So all of these things are interconnected. And again, suspicion can lead to envy, and envy can lead us to, be more suspicious of people as well. And so, what do we do in this case? Well, first we need to remind ourselves of the verses of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran, where He says, وَلَا تَتَمَنَّ مَا فَضَّلَ اللَّهُ بِهِ بَعْضُكُمْ عَلَى بَعْضٍ لِلرِّجَالُ النِّصْفُ مِمَّا اكْتَسَبُوا وَلِلنِّسَاءِ نَصِيبٌ مِمَّا اكْتَسَبُوا وَاسْأَلُوا اللَّهُ مِنْ فَضْلِهِ إِنَّ اللَّهَ كَانَ بِكُلِّ شَيْءٍ عَلِيمٌ. And do not crave what Allah has given some of you over others. Men will be rewarded according to their deeds, and women will be equally rewarded according to theirs. Rather, ask Allah for His bounty. Surely Allah has the perfect knowledge of all things. He also says, وَاللَّهُ فَضَّلَ بَعْضُكُمْ عَلَى بَعْضٍ فِي الرِّزْقِ فَمَا الَّذِينَ فُضِّلُوا بِبِرَادِ رِزْقِهِمْ عَلَى مَا مَلَكَتْ أَيْمَانِهِمْ فَهُمْ فِيهِ سَوَاءٌ أَفَنِعْمَةُ اللَّهِ يَجْحَدُونَ. And Allah has favored some of you over others for provisions. But those who have been favored would not share their wealth with those in their possession, making them their equals. Do they not deny Allah's favor? So in the first verse, Allah again is telling us not to challenge what He has given to others essentially. He knows what's best. He knows what has to be given to people, and He rewards them accordingly. But He tells us instead of looking at what others have, focus on your own self instead. Ask Allah for His bounties and work towards them instead. And Allah will provide for you in the best way. So Allah is Ar-Razaq. Why are we to question Him on how He provides His rizq? in this world. And what's also mentioned in the next verse is that when we do have as well, we do not share. That's all out of jealousy of people gaining over us. That's also another fault or disease that we can have essentially. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is criticizing both those who have and those who don't have, essentially, and explaining how they can both exhibit jealousy and then act upon it in the wrong ways. And again, when we do this, this is what Shaitan wants us to be in ultimately, where we have our own selves and our own communities in disarray. He wants us to prevent us from rising up essentially, and having proper iman within our communities. Because when the Islamic community is held down, Shaitan is very happy. He's very happy when he sees us not succeeding or building to our full potential, whether it's in matters of this life and the next life. A weak Muslim community means that Shaitan, becomes much more empowered. And then and again, one of these is when we have envy, we don't trust in Allah. We lose our faith in Him, and it destroys like any sense of faith that we have, and we're not able to go for the rewards that Allah wants us to gain. Because when we strive towards Allah, it can put us in an even more blessed position, essentially, and that is what Shaitan is preventing. But we also need to remember, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, وَمَنْ يُوقَ شُحَّ نَفْسِهِ فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْمُفْلِحُونَ. And whoever is saved from the selfishness of their own souls, it is truly those who are successful. So the key to get over jealousy is to, again, master ourselves over our own desires, essentially. Master ourselves over any feelings of jealousy that we may have. And so, how do we do this? So, first and foremost, a lot of the spiritual masters, and just continue on from my previous point, a lot of the spiritual masters say that we have to oppose our own desires. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, وَأَمَّا مَنْ خَافَ مَقَامَ رَبِّهِ وَنَهَى النَّفْسَ عَنِ الْهَوَى فَإِنَّ الْجَنَّةَ هِيَ الْمَأْوَى. And as for those who are in awe standing before their Lord and restrain themselves from evil desires, the paradise will certainly be their home. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He warns us constantly that many nations are destroyed by their desires. And when we focus on that, we focus on dunya, and then we start to compete, and then the whole cycle of jealousy starts to continue. And one of the names of Jahannam is Hawiyya, which again stems from Hawa, or desires as well. And so when we prod on them, the negative effects of jealousy, they come in. But then instead of focusing on jealousy, or focusing on just our dunya, we have to focus not just on our akhirah, but also how to do good for those around us. If we do feel that we have a jealousy of someone, do something good for them, help them out. Or even better than that is to make dua for them, because that gives us good feelings towards our brothers and sisters. And also when we make dua for someone, an angel will say, and Ameen, and unto you as well. So when we make dua for someone to gain more, an angel makes the same dua for us too. So ultimately we win and we gain more empathy for each other, and we're able to have more of our own du'as accepted too. So cultivating that positivity as opposed to cultivating our desires. And another thing, as I mentioned throughout this small talk, is that we have to remember the harm that it brings to oneself. We need to remember how it makes us more sad and anxious. And when we're in a state of negativity, that just prevents us from achieving more or going towards positivity, whether it's in our affairs of this world or our affairs in the next world. And so when we are in a negative mental state, that as well will pull us down, and that is again what Shaitan wants for us to be negative all the time as opposed to positive. And we see people who are filled with jealousy, they can even go to the point of insanity ultimately. And so why would we want to do that? And even we need to recognize where we might have hidden jealousy in some of our own words or our own actions of criticism. For example, a lot of people might see a lot of, let's just say, wealthy Muslims from a certain region of the world having wealth. you can criticize how they're spending their wealth and how they're having a negative impact on the ummah, you can do that. But to criticize the wealth itself, we should not, just because that wealth is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's a test from Allah, and how we use it, we're answerable to Allah, not answerable to our fellow human beings ultimately. And we also need to recognize that whoever is rich and whoever is poor, Allah has given them that state for a reason. They each have their own different tests, and Allah knows best ultimately. And we need to know that, again, envy is never going to benefit, because everything is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we also need to remember that, the own good deeds that we work for in this world are going to be destroyed by envy. The Prophet says to them, as I mentioned before, envy burns away good deeds like wood burns away hot fire. So why would we want to ruin our iman in that case? And when we do this, envy also pushes us towards sins, as I've mentioned a couple of times. Sins and making us find ways to harm each other. But some other actions we can do is to have more gratitude and tawakkul. To be thankful to Allah for what we have, and to strive more things for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala without competing with one another. Another thing is, whenever we see something good from someone else, get in the habit of saying MashaAllah or Allahumma barik, so that you can recognize the good that Allah has given to them and also make dua for them at the same time. We also need to avoid boasting, because again, like with the example of many of the Quraysh, pride can lead to envy coming in. We also need to remember the hereafter, and that whatever we have in this dunya, it's temporary provisions from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What we've been given, okay, fine, but we know that this world is ultimately going to come to an end, so why simply focus on that when there are greater things ahead? Another thing is to increase ourselves in charity by giving and wanting good for one another. That can also take away any envy from us, essentially. And then the last part about this section is that we need to recognize that we ourselves are not perfect, and that we are all susceptible to spiritual diseases in whatever form, and all of us have a bit of envy here and there. Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayhi, he mentions that the first step to dealing with this is recognizing that you have it to some extent, but it's how we deal with that. Do we deal with it in a positive direction by wishing good for our fellow brothers and sisters and acting good ourselves, or do we go in the negative direction instead? And then, so the best thing that we can do is just work on ourselves and ask Allah and see where we are lacking, and then ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help us in this. I mean, Imam Abu Taymiyyah rahmatullah alayhi, he also mentions that nobody is free from hasad, but the noble person hides it, while the unnoble person is the one who shows it. So even if we do have it, we suppress it, and we find ways to get rid of it, essentially. And so he also continues and says that a person will not be brought to account for whatever crosses his mind, but will be brought to account for what he says and does. The Prophet ﷺ mentions that Allah will forgive my ummah for their mistakes, what they forget, and what they are forced to do. So even if a thought comes to our mind, it's completely normal, it's how we deal with that thought. Do we brush it aside, and do we seek protection from Allah, or do we let that thought fester and turn into something more dangerous? So again, none of us are free from it, and so we need to, again, find ways to deal with it positively and ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect us from this disease as well. And now, very, very last part of the speech. I think I'm going to take a few second break and just have some chai right now, just to rehydrate my throat a bit. The very last part is I've been talking about how we ourselves can deal with envy when it comes to us, but how do we recognize envy in other people as well? I mean, as I mentioned before, the Prophet ﷺ, he said that anyone can be envied for any little blessing that they have. And so what are the signs to recognize this? And I'm not just saying this for our own protection, but to also, give you a bit of a reality check to reflect upon whether or not we do these things as well. So take it as an advice for yourself and as an advice to protect yourself as well as to prevent yourself too. So the first thing is that you might see someone, if they cheer for you in hardship, they encourage you in hardship and like seeing you there, but they are not happy when they start seeing you succeed. Like, they're by your side when things are hard, but once you gain joy, once you're out of that hardship, they become silent, they become cold, or they might force words of celebrations. So again, this is a insecurity within them, and that is a sign that someone could be jealous of you. And we need to remember that it's not our burden to carry their jealousy, because what we have is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is for them to deal with. And so we just recognize that it's Allah who has lifted us, and it's not on us to dictate how someone else ultimately feels. Another thing they might do is downplay your achievements and say that, oh, what you've achieved, it's not as great, or it's not or you can do better, or this or that. Like, if they downplay whenever you achieve something, that's also another sign that someone might have envy towards you. After this, someone might also provide criticism as advice. And again, most of you in the room are older than I, and you've probably seen this and have had more experience with this than I have. This is just a reminder for me as well as for everyone. But essentially, when we see someone not being sincere with the advice that they give, or in their advice they try to control or discourage us. It's like, the good litmus test is that if we feel that an advice has empowered us, then that's a good person. That's not someone who's envious of us. But when we feel more down after being given advice, that could be a sign that someone is saying that out of envy or control instead. And we see that the true friends that we have will give us a reminder and want to respect our journey. But then those who aren't our friends, they'll try to pull us down with words disguised as advice, essentially. And this can represent the own uncertainty that they have within themselves. Another thing is having just being suspicious of you at all times, or even going to the point where someone might spread rumors or bad words about you. They might smile to your face and praise you in public, but in private, they'll try to tarnish your name. That's another big sign of jealousy. But even then, we have to know that the backbiter ultimately only harms themselves, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He knows the truth and He will deal with them directly. We have to know that the truth belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that Allah will ultimately be the one that protects you, because ultimately their words cannot destroy us in the long run. And the last thing is that when someone has the constant need to compete with you, you might be on your own journey, but you see that someone is always trying to match what you're doing or surpass what you're doing at every step, and you've entered a race that you never asked to be in. So again, true peace ultimately comes when we are grateful to Allah and recognize that the blessings are from Him. It doesn't come in having to compete with our brothers and sisters at every step. And so if we find ourselves trying to match people whenever they achieve something, it's a good sign to check our own selves. Because ultimately in this world, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us all a space to grow, but if we're just trying to match people all the time, again, that defeats the purpose of growing for the sake of Allah only. And so what do we ultimately do in these cases? It depends on the severity, obviously, of the person as well. One, if someone is just dealing with low self-esteem and they're doing things on a very minor scale, you can do things to help boost their self-esteem, help them reaffirm their own confidence, make dua for them, remind them of the favors of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In minor, make dua for them as well. So in that case, you can still treat them with goodness. But if they go to a large extent where they're trying to hinder you in the long run, they're making you exhausted with competition, then it might be just best to ignore and walk away from such a person. Because if they're ultimately harming you, then again, you don't want to destroy your own dunya and akhirah because of one relationship. And ultimately, you need to remember that none of this, because sometimes you feel that, people feel this way around me because it's my fault. Not at all. You need to remember that your achievements are from Allah and your blessings are from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you're not in charge of how the people around, you're not in charge of how people feel because of that. And so, essentially, and at the same time, we need to, even if we ignore and walk away from that person, we want to prevent their whispers from affecting us. we still make dua for them because ultimately we hate the sin and not the sinner. And the Prophet ﷺ, he did mention that whoever would love to be delivered from hellfire and into paradise, let him die with the faith in Allah on the last day. Let him treat people the way he would love to be treated. So ultimately, even if we walk away from a person, still make dua for them. Still have the hope that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will guide them towards better, but you're removing yourself to protect yourself in the long run. Another thing to protect us from ayn, and this is my very last point, is that there are certain adhkar that we can recite within the morning and the evening to protect ourselves, especially from the evil eye. The first is a dua to recite in the morning and the evening 3 times, and this protects us from any calamity. And that is Bismillahi alladhi la yadurru ma'asmihi shay'un fil ardi wa la fis sama wa huwa as-sami'ul alim. And when one recites this 3 times in the morning and evening, it is a source of protection for us throughout the day. There's also some other du'as like A'udhu bi kalimatillahi min tammati min sharri ma khalaq, which means I seek the protection in Allah and His perfect words from every harm that He has created. There's also similar dua which is A'udhu bi kalimatillahi min tamma wa min kulli shaytanin hamma wa min kulli aynin lamma, which means that I seek again the protection of Allah from the shaitan and their whispers, and ultimately from the ayn as well. So keep reciting these du'as every day, morning and evening, as part of your adhkar, and this is a way for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect you. Also, don't forget to recite the du'as like Bismillah tawakkaltu ala Allah wa la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah when we're leaving the house, because Allah protects us through that. And don't forget to recite, the Surah Fatiha, Nas, Surah Nas and Falaq especially are very important, because these protect us from evil eye, black magic, etc. And so I'm going to end off here pretty much and just say, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us from this major spiritual disease. May He help us be of those who build ourselves and build our communities and our ummah, and not be of those who destroy them. Ameen ya Rabbil Alameen. And so I am pretty much done for my talk. If anyone has any questions, feel free to raise your hand up. I'll try my best to answer them, inshallah. Questions, comments?
Nobody? Question?
For any comments as well, you can feel free to add on. Well, yeah, basically, if you see someone who, for example, is praying tahajjud, and you're saying, okay, this is a reminder for me that I should start praying tahajjud as well, that's a positive jealousy. It becomes negative when you want that blessing to be taken away from them. Because ultimately, any worship that you do, sunan, nawafil, it is a blessing from Allah and a way to gain closeness to Him. And so, if you see someone doing something good and you want to copy that good for yourself, that's totally fine. It's only when if you have resentment towards that person or want that taken away from them. So, yeah, you're correct in that case. Okay, that's fine.
Thank you.